right. So how did I get into trucking? For those of you who may or may not know, age of 17 is when I started trucking, and I'm almost 6 feet tall. So when you're 6 feet tall in high school, I don't seem to grow anymore. I just seem to go from high school 6 feet to now. I started in the moving industry. And I didn't have anybody in trucking. I didn't know anybody in trucking. For me, it was about just getting a job. And Dad said, "You're going to go get a job," because I happened to drop out of high school. And so went and found a job at a moving company and just started humping furniture. And I look back now, and it was one of the best training I ever did. But for most people, they may not think about a moving company. They may think, well, it's too much hard work. But you learn so much. You learn customer service. You learn how to deal with people. I was able to learn driving. I worked there for a year. I worked for Atlas, an Atlas agent, and then after a while went to a North American agent, and then back to Atlas, and back to North American. So that's how that kind of worked. But for me, it was a great experience. So I was just one of those helpers. We called them lumpers back then, and just moving the furniture off the truck, and hopefully getting in. And sometimes that's the best way to start a career without having too much. I find today everybody wants to know what the end game is, how much money they're going to make going out of the gate. And it might be better just to see if you like the job. So I really liked the job. I was just happy to make a buck. We weren't paid really well, but I was really busy. And I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the physical part of it, and figuring things out. Moving's a science. It's not necessarily just about grunting and picking things up. And there's a science to carrying everything, and I learned a lot. And then the nice thing was that after probably 6 months of that, I started looking at what the drivers were doing. I saw the drivers were getting paid more money than I was getting paid. They were getting, they were getting more work, because if there's not enough work for everybody, the drivers work first. And they were kind of the boss of the truck. They weren't carrying as much stuff. So I decided that, I might want to be a driver. So the nice thing is, back then, and we're talking around the 80s there, the early 80s, that you didn't have to go through all of there wasn't that many schools around to go through anyway. So, the training was, if you found someone to help you. So I just went and wrote my D license, got it, and that was it, and then kind of practiced with the truck, and went on from there. So I worked at Atlas for a couple of years, really enjoyed it, and then decided there was some better opportunity over at a local North American agent. So I went over there and was pretty good at just finding out what's I was good at taking care of my truck. I was a real clean freak for that. And I was driving a straight truck, and back then they had bought a whole bunch of new straight trucks. There was 3 or 4 of them. It was a small fleet, probably about 10 trucks altogether. And really enjoyed the teamwork there. Worked with a lot of people who were really just good, hardworking people, and really enjoyed it. But again, noticed that wanted to climb that ladder, wanted to kind of move up. And so I moved from the D license, and met a guy there who, we had one tractor trailer. I remember it was a GMC gas job, and just, really just got my friend to show me how to drive. And he was the guy who showed me how to drive. But, I learned some lessons at the first Atlas agent. The reason I left the Atlas agent was he wasn't really doing things right as far as, the money and stuff. Like, he would give you $50 back then. He would give you $50 to go and do. And I remember a funny story where I was with the tractor trailer, and this still sticks to my mind to this day. So the guy that I was driving with at the time, he drove a Brigadier, an old Brigadier General day cab, and he was the tractor trailer guy of the group. Really nice guy, and kind of nonchalant. And he was the mover, and he got a trip to Windsor. So he had to go to Windsor, pick up a load, and then bring it back. And so he hired me to go with him for the day, and I was the supervisor, and we were both company drivers. I wasn't the supervisor, sorry, I was just the helper. And so the two of us go away in this truck. And we get down, and we were given $50. $50. Now, I know fuel was cheaper back then, but $50 to go 3 or 4 hours one way and 3 and 4 hours back with a load of furniture. Even, I didn't say much, but I'm thinking that's not enough money get where you had to go. Anyway, we took off, and we ended up getting. We got there, we loaded. So, and when we came back, he didn't account for the headwind coming back. So when we came back, we got about halfway to three-quarters of the way back, and we ran out of fuel on the side of the highway. And still to this day, I still remember that. That was one of the things I remember. You never ever run on the bottom end of your tanks. Always run on the top end, and always make sure you've got some other backup. I don't know how we got fuel. I think we walked to some gas station, was able to get some fuel. He paid out of his own pocket. I sure hope he got reimbursed. I know I didn't have any money to put in for fuel, but that taught me a valuable lesson about driving. It was one of the things that I still remember to this day, and I stopped driving 10 years ago. But I remember when I went to North America, and that was one of the things that, they had cards, we had accounts, all that kind of stuff. So we were able to get some better funding there. And the guy that taught me to drive, he was the local tractor trailer driver, but his father was one of the owner operators on the fleet. And his father ran Florida all the time. That was one of the big areas he went. And so he would teach me to drive, and if he was not available, I would use that truck to practice. I remember we were in an industrial area. I would go on weekends and practice backing into docks and those kind of things. That's kind of how you were shown. And then his dad would let him take a trip once in a while to the U.S. So my first trip to the U.S. was, we took a load to Cleveland, Ohio. So it's only 6 hours away. And I remember I'd never been across the border before, as far as by myself. I'm sure I was with my family. And went there and just was amazed. We got into customs, I think. We left late. We got into customs, I think, like midnight or something. And they tore the truck apart. We didn't get out of there till 6 o'clock in the morning. And I remember just going, I can't believe this, like 6 hours we've been at the border. And then we just drove, and I don't know how he got there, but he drove, and we unloaded that day. And, I get a lot of people say, I'm not going to cross the border because it's only, I'm only 2 hours. I don't want to be held up that long. Well, my first episode with that was 6 hours, and I still crossed the border for 10 years after that. So it's not don't make it a big deal. Things like that just happen. But I remember, and then the next trip he took me on to the U.S. was Bluegrass, Iowa. For any of you who've been in Bluegrass, Iowa, I consider it one of the coldest spots on the planet. I remember it was like February when we rolled in. They had one stoplight. You couldn't see anything. You couldn't see traffic anywhere. It was just the middle of nowhere. And I thought we were up like on the North Pole or somewhere. And still remember that to this day. But he would allow me to drive a little bit. He'd let me take the wheel a little bit, so I learned, and he taught me a lot. As we were taking ramps, taking bends, he would always help me out and show me that the sign that's there is not really for the tractor trailers. It's more for cars. So make sure your speed's appropriate. I remember things like going the wrong way into a truck stop. He said, don't do that because of the spikes and all that kind of stuff. So I learned a lot from him. He was really good at teaching me how to drive. And, as much as I didn't have as we say, a professional instructor, he was a very good instructor and took his time. And I got my license, and I started driving for the group, for that North American agent. So it was funny because we really got a friendship going, and I think a lot of times that's what happens with these companies is you get a friendship going. And I remember that we started talking, and we were both driving. We both kind of been getting tired of that place where we were, and we were thinking of moving on. I mean, you got to picture both of us. I'm 20 years old. He's 24 years old. Big dreams, big plans, without an idea of how we're going to get there. And I remember that we thought about driving a truck, thought about owning a truck together. And so I'm gonna leave that for the next episode because that's where we come in. But just to give you some other funny stories, like as a driver at that North American agent, we had a pretty good team. Like we all got along. There wasn't a lot of infighting. There was a couple drivers that were kind of always trying to be the better one of group, but we all got along pretty well, and we had a good team. We all worked together pretty well, and so but the guys would do stuff. When it's slow, like I said before, that drivers get the work, right? So if there's only enough work for maybe two crews, and there's usually 2 to 3 men on a crew, if there's only enough work for two crews, and let's say there's 4 drivers that are employed there, the drivers will go out as 2 crews first, and then they will hire people after that. Now, if all 4 crews were needed, then the 4 drivers would have helpers. So a lot of times there was a couple of us that were drivers, and they would do stuff. They thought it was funny because the driver, when you're unloading a furniture van, the driver's job is to fold. So you break down the tiers or break down the furniture so that it, and the helpers carry it in. And the driver basically folds the pads and makes sure the truck is ready and presentable for the next move. Well, when you have multiple drivers on there, you will find that the drivers go, hey, why am we carrying all the furniture? Because they're used to being the leaders. The drivers on a furniture truck are always the kind of the bosses of the group. So they would do stuff like, I remember one move, I was folding the pads, and they kind of got tired that I was in there. I may have looked like I was taking longer, so I didn't have to carry as much. I don't know what it was. But basically, while I was in there, they closed the doors and they drove they drove back to the yard. So I'm stuck in the back of my own truck, and they're driving the truck back home. So they drove all the way back to the yard. I mean, it wasn't that far. It might have been a 20-minute drive, but it was pretty funny. I don't know. You wouldn't get away with that stuff today, but back in the early '80s, you could do stuff like that and get away with it. So we had a lot of fun that way. We had some good times. Friday night, everybody ended up at the same bar. So it was a fun way to do it. So I really enjoyed that beginning experience, and I would urge any of you thinking of getting into into any career, especially one in trucking, don't look so much to see that perfect company. You're not going to find it. Just get in there, see if you enjoy the people, get some experience, and you'll find that down the road you'll be glad that you had that. So I'm going to end this one here because the next one we jump into is me moving along to being an owner-operator. So we'll save that for next week there, and then we are going to come back and talk about how I started as an owner-operator. You don't want to miss that one. All right, my friends. Talk to you later. Bye.